To call this meeting to order, and there's only one item on the agenda that we're here to deal with. Report number 13-117 from the Chief Administrative Officer re Fiscal Gap, and so I'm going to turn it over to Jim to lead us through his presentation.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Cool.
So in order to be captured on the mic, I'm going to try to sit still, but it's not my nature. I might get up and wander around a bit too. First thing I should say is that this PowerPoint is not meant in any way to replace the very dense report you have received. In fact, it's not really even a summary of that dense report. It's kind of an introduction to that dense report. And the first thing I'd like to talk about is why administration is now bringing you a report on fiscal gap. The really short answer to that is that the world changes and knowledge advances. I've been, as you know, in this business for more than 30 years. And in the entire time I have worked in local government in BC, there's been a general assumption amongst municipalities in BC that good things were going to happen, that growth was going to happen, that progress was going to happen. Every community with an elevator and a corner store and a gas pump believes it's only a matter of time until Tim Hortons and Walmart arrive. It's what makes working in local government so exciting, is that level of optimism that's always there. There's also been a widespread assumption that if that doesn't happen in a timely fashion, you can always count on the citizens to be willing to pay a little bit more in taxes to keep their services. So we've been in that sort of mindset, certainly the 30 plus years I've been in the business, and I believe many years in the past beyond that. What's happened in more recent times is that the fiscal condition of municipalities has worsened throughout Canada. And there has been academic studies and expert work on that subject, certainly for the last 7-8 years, quite intensive. As that work was going on, we encountered the problems in the world economy that we have seen, and those problems have significantly reduced that sense of optimism and that faith that things will turn out well. Some of the vulnerabilities in the underpinnings of Western economies have got very real. And then, of course, we have our neighbors to the south who have done a great deal to help us to understand the whole idea of a fiscal gap and a fiscal cliff. Because of their political impasse, their boat is headed over the falls, and that's raised consciousness as well. There's been a couple, you have them attached in your report, there's been a couple of pretty in-depth economic studies on the whole topic of government fiscal condition. And so Shelley and I have reviewed all of that. We've looked at our own particular circumstances, and we think it's time to have this dialogue with council. In that context of the presentation, this presentation has a few elements to it. The report itself is a summary of the major themes from the work of experts on this topic. And the single most important theme in all of that work is that the fiscal gap is largely, the largest factor in the fiscal gap is citizen expectation, and the only reasonable prospect for solution is citizen expectation. So I thought I'd give you a little briefing of where those expectations came from, why it is citizens feel about government services the way they do. As a disclaimer, now is the time for disclaimers, there are a couple of biblical quotes in my presentation. That is not meant to in any way imply that my personal faith beliefs are in this presentation, or that in fact Christian theology is the answer. I'm really talking about the Bible as a historical document. And we've all heard the phrase, there's nothing new under the sun. And I really need to explain to you that government is the oldest human construct. Throughout recorded history entirely, what we have discovered is that humanity organizes itself into governments. They do so in order to have common services, and they fund those common services through taxation. And our records, the records that have survived, show that that's been happening for 8,000 years. So there is literally nothing new under the sun in that regard. The first tax records you have are clay tablets from 6000 BC in what is now Iraq. When my family and I visited the Natural Museum of History in London last summer, we went and saw the Rosetta Stone. The Rosetta Stone, for those of you who don't just watch TV and think it's some program to help you learn Spanish, the Rosetta Stone is actually a stone dating from 200 BC that is been the key in deciphering hieroglyphs. So all of those records past that time, the other 5,800 years of recorded records, have mostly been translated because of the knowledge gained out of the Rosetta Stone. But what the Rosetta Stone is a tax exemption bylaw. It is exactly the same work you're going to do this October. It exempts religious orders as defined from taxation for that particular year. That's what it is. The Apostle Matthew was a tax assessor. This system you're sitting in, where you are an offshoot of the British parliamentary system, was created because of a tax revolt. Please don't take offense to this. Those of you whose election signs said, I'm going to be more transparent and accountable. Well, transparency and accountability was the thrust behind Magna Carta. So, you know, your whole parliamentary system was designed for that purpose. The earliest forms of taxation were on production, beer or grain. What we know as property tax, the system we're in, started in England in the 1600s. And what it was is, if you were a normal peasant, you were lucky to have a single room that was heated, that had a fireplace. If you were wealthy, you would have a domicile that had 10 or 12 rooms that had fireplaces. So property tax was based on the idea that if you had 12 hearths, you paid 12 times as much as the person who had one. So that would be probably in those times a rational way of doing it. Probably the person with 10 fireplaces was 10 times as able to pay taxes as the person who had one. But that methodology is 400 years old now, and we're still using it. And it's not quite so clear now that if you have a $400,000 house, you have twice the ability to pay taxes as if you have a $200,000 house. On the topic of the expectations of the citizens, this is another Bible quote. Jesus was very mad at some people, and what he told them was, I'm telling you the truth. You are so bad that tax collectors and prostitutes are going to get into the kingdom of God ahead of you. So if you are one of those folks who runs your life by the saying, what would Jesus do? What Jesus would do is slag bureaucrats and compare them to prostitutes and hate taxation. So if your expectations are that somehow, OMG, there's something wrong, I've been elected and everybody hates taxes and hates bureaucrats, I need to tell you that that's been going on for 8,000 years. It's going to go on for the next 8,000. Nothing you do is going to change that. It's not an expectation you should have. It's the normal condition. So that begs the question, why do citizens form governments if they see them as bad, and they see taxes as bad, and they see bureaucrats as bad? Well, the answer to that's kind of self-evident. In terms of human advancement, Abraham Maslow was an American psychologist. He did a piece of work on how human beings grow and self-actualize. They need to achieve their basic needs first before they can achieve their higher needs, and they always look to government over those 8,000 years as providing them the base that allows them to become what they can become. So this is really the core services argument right here. Later I'm going to go on about why our tradition deviated from that. But citizen expectation for 8,000 years has been the government will look after your basic needs, and to do so they will tax you, and unfortunately they will employ these awful prostitute-like people called bureaucrats in order to look after your safety needs, your physiological needs like water and heat, and that will allow you to become happy, to become self-actualized, to become something more than basic survival. Where we have digressed in 8,000 years is we have created, the system we are in is a Western democratic system that actually has its underpinnings much more recently, several hundred years ago with the creation of the United States. This is where Western democracies diverged from the idea of core service only. The United States was set up in a very elegant document, the Declaration of Independence, penned by Thomas Jefferson, saying that what we expect now is not just life, and it's not just liberty, it's also the pursuit of happiness. It's quality of life. It's the basics of life, it's the quality of life, and it's the right to individual freedoms. That's our tradition. It's relatively recent in that 8,000 year history, but it still exists. We've moved beyond core for government to these ends. These ends that are not, there are three things. They are basic life, they are basic personal freedom, and they are improved quality of life. Those are the ends of government. That's why we do it. Everything else is a means. These are the ends that we have adopted in Western democratic tradition. And so, that differentiates us from other forms of government, say North Korea, where it's only the basic necessities of life that are provided. There is no individual liberty, and there is no intention or concern about whether the population is happy with their quality of life. Because those expectations are so entrenched in our citizens, I don't believe that they wish to become North Korea. So anyone who tells you that all the citizens in Dawson Creek want out of their government is the basic necessities, roads, water, and sewer, is trying to reverse these 300 years of history and trying to convince you that North Korea is a better model. It's just not going to fly. Our community charter has extremely similar wording. It's just, of course, they aren't Thomas Jefferson, and it's nowhere near as elegant. But my basic point is the why of your government is that you are a good thing. You have always been considered a good thing. You've been considered a good thing for 8,000 years, and for the last few hundred, there's been a particular way of thinking about what you will provide in the way of freedom and happiness. And with the consent of the governed, which means in our system, it is not the 7 folks that are elected who decide what makes people happy, it's the people themselves. Everything else is a means, not an end. We have to tax to fund programs and services. We've had to for 8,000 years. We will for the next 8,000 years. But that taxation is not the end, it's a means. And in fact, the individual programs and services you provide are not an end, they are a means. Everything you do is measured against how it handles or how it provides for the basic needs of life, individual freedoms, and an improved quality of life. That's what you are here for. So, that's your context. That's where citizen expectations come from over history, in a democracy, and particularly in the Western democracies that we are a part of. Moving to the fiscal gap itself, a deficit is pretty well understood by all of us. You spend more than you make. In government, a cyclical deficit is considered to be you're spending more than you're making just because of some bad economic circumstances. And a structural deficit is one that you're going to spend more than you're making every year, and it doesn't matter whether the economy is good or bad. Right now, the BC government proclaims it has a cyclical deficit, which is to say it intends to grow itself out of deficit. When the economy is at the peak of its cycle, they believe that they will have a balanced budget. I'm not convinced myself, but that's what they believe. Government of Canada has moved past that. Government of Canada acknowledges it has a structural deficit that's going to exist whether or not the economy reaches a peak in its cycle. However, municipalities have none of the above. We don't run the first kind of deficit. We never have a year in which our expenditures exceed our revenues. So we can't progress to a cyclical deficit or a structural deficit. So everything must be just fine. This is where the term fiscal gap comes from. Things are not just fine because we're not running any kind of annual deficit. Fiscal gap is a term that's meant to look forward. It's meant to say, even in the context of your annually balanced budget, there's a problem, there's a looming problem. Deloitte is the Deloitte study is the sort of seminal piece of work on this topic. They define fiscal gap as the imbalance between expected revenues and promised expenditures. So in our case, and in fact in the case of all municipalities, you're looking at where your revenues are going to come from in the future, and you're looking at the assumption that you're going to provide the services and infrastructure that you're providing now. In the case of every municipality in Canada, and certainly in the case of Dawson Creek, if you look at those two numbers, they don't match. So the term fiscal gap is meant to highlight that there is a significant issue looming, even though you're balancing your budget annually. So, what causes the fiscal gap? I am not, as you know, an advocate for the concept that government should be run like a business. I don't think government and business are the same thing. However, in terms of fiscal stability, the same factors apply. Its revenues, its expenses, its assets, its liabilities, its cash flow. According to that Deloitte study, the first thing we have to do if we're going to make progress on this is correctly identify the causes. So their phrase is, when causes are misattributed, cures are usually inefficacious. That's the kind of language that high-powered chartered accountants writing in a report would use, but really all it's saying is you can't cure something unless you know what it is. Most importantly, this is not a local problem. It is not the result of individual actors. There is no solution in simply hiring better bureaucrats and throwing the current bums out of office and replacing them with right-thinking people. That solution is obviously not applicable because this problem isn't just in Dawson Creek. This problem is in 40,000, according to the Congressional Budget Office in the United States. It exists in 40-some thousand municipalities in the United States. According to the FCM, it exists in every municipality in Canada. So, the first thing people have to get a handle around is this treadmill we're on, where the citizens elect a council and then immediately start working to throw them out of office to elect another council, isn't going to fix the problem. The problem isn't actually the people that were elected. The problem is the system of expectations that we have out of our 8,000-year tradition. The other thing that's not true is that we just have a spending problem. We have both a revenue and a spending problem. If you don't look at both of them, you are not going to solve the problem. And the United States is just a stark example of this. Because they cannot compromise between the two views, one view is it's only a revenue problem, the other view is it's only a spending problem, they are literally taking what was at one time the world's predominant economy and driving it to third world status just because the politicians won't give up their deeply held positions. It's childish. Here's our little problem on the both ends. Municipalities get 8% of the tax collected in the country, but they provide 19% of all the program and service spending, and they're responsible for 60% of the public infrastructure. Those numbers don't add up. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to see that they do not. On the other hand, here's our advantage. We've got 90% of all the politicians in the country. 9 out of 10 politicians in Canada are at the local government level. So what does that mean? That means that if there are expectations in the citizenry fueled by potentially undeliverable promises made by politicians, the problem will be 90% greater in municipalities. So, on some detail. The spending problem, part of it's downloading from senior governments. A whole lot of it is that our cost inflation significantly exceeds the basic consumer price index, and that the biggest factor in that is wage costs. We have shifting demographics that apply to us as they do to the senior governments, but mostly what we have is a persistent, unabated demand by citizens for public services on the aspects that are over and above basic needs or basic liberty. They are in the improved quality of life area. I will give you a couple of examples from the last week. We start with a well-intentioned lady who was frustrated by the fact that she could not find parking at the soccer park on a Wednesday a couple weeks ago. And she has been complaining, posting on Facebook, and her base point, which is you shouldn't have a soccer park unless there is ample parking immediately beside it for everyone at peak times, has resonated. Many people have said, you know, that sounds right to me. That is the level of citizen expectation. But when you look at it, what we are talking about is a 7-week soccer season in which, 7 or 8 weeks, if we get good weather, in which there are 2 days a week where there is a real bottleneck because the younger soccer age group and slow pitch is playing at the same time. That's 14 or 16 days a year out of 365. And the citizen expectation is the local government will spend $500,000 acquiring land and $500,000 developing parking to accommodate those 16 or 18 days. There's not enough money in the world for every demand of that nature to be met. It is simply an expectation that exceeds our resourcing to accommodate it. And it is absolutely not unusual. You sit on council now, you know that at least at every council meeting you get similar requests, and your phone rings at home and you get similar requests. And that is just the level of expectation. And it drives spending to meet those expectations into places where the resourcing is just overwhelmed. All of the work of all of the studies that are attached to your report, all of the summaries of those, most of the media coverage, just keeps coming back to this. That's your number one issue. It's complicated, of course, by the fact that in order to be elected, politicians, and again, it happens 9 times more frequently at local government than it does at other levels of government, tend to promise that they're going to meet those expectations because it's an excellent way to get elected. It's kind of a spiral because you know, you were all raised, as I was, by your parents to say, there's no such thing as a free lunch. If it seems too good to be true, it's too good to be true. And you've got these little BS detectors in your brain that go off. When you get the email from the Nigerian minister of whatever saying he wants to put 44 million euros in your bank account and, you know, for a 10% fee paid to you, he'll take it out at a later time, you just delete that email. You know that that's not possible.
You're not?
When you're watching the hockey game at your house and the doorbell rings, you go answer it and it's a guy with a vacuum cleaner and he looks over your shoulder and he says, your carpets are just filthy, I can tell from here, but this machine, it's going to clean every drop of dirt, and by the way, it'll do your dishes and it'll comb your hair, and you're not going to actually pay a thing. It's just shipping and handling. What do? You close the door.
Yeah.
Your little detector's going ding, 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 you close the door. Doorbell rings while you're watching a hockey game and it's a politician. He says, you know what? Everything's wrong in this city. I'm going to cure it all. I'm going to give you more service and less tax. You invite him into your house. You say, where can I vote? Something's shorted out in your BS detector. I don't know why, but that's the truth. Where's our revenue problem? We talked about hearth taxes. Property tax is just a butt ugly way to distribute the burdens of paying for services. We know that grants from our senior levels of government are diminishing or disappearing. We have in our own context, we have a particular sensitivity around fair share. We know that our own source revenues, our fees and charges, can't be universally applied. You guys have been doing 6 months of work on that, and you know that there's limits to where that can go. Particularly, not to agree with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation or the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, but actually what they're saying is true. There is a practical limit on how much property tax a business can pay and stay competitive. There is a practical limit on how much property tax a resident can pay before it's not affordable to them and they lose their home for taxation. So, that all seems pretty self-evident, doesn't it? Why isn't anything being done about this? And literally, if you look at the reports, not one thing is being done by any government in the Western world to truly address this. Well, the first thing is, although I would characterize, Shelley and I believe this problem in Dawson Creek to be imminent, as in likely to manifest itself in the next decade, it is not urgent. It's not happening this year. It's not happening in your term of office. It's not happening in the term of office of the next group of politicians. So, when those effects are in the distance, we're all like this. We all tend to put off until the last possible moment doing something hard. In the case of municipalities, there are a bunch of things that are out of our control. So our responses would be limited in a way that the provincial and federal governments would not be. And so sometimes you could look at that and say, why even start? Most particularly is the public expectation. There is very little appetite for reduced surface. There is very little political heat around these issues. Those reports come out from the CFIB. They go on the front page of the Daily News. The mayor gives a quote saying, well, it's all bogus. And everybody forgets about it the next day. When we get to the votes, the Canadian Taxpayer Federation in BC had people sign a, quote, taxpayer pledge at the last municipal election. 93% of the people who signed that pledge were not elected. The citizens only put 7% of those people into office. There's no political heat around this. Incumbents are returned at extraordinary numbers. So, the political system in which you work is not generating heat about this. And it's still possible. We have been incorporated since 1961. I guarantee you that since 1961, people have run for council in Dawson Creek saying that they were going to give you more service and less tax. They don't deliver that, but we re-elect them. They can't deliver that. That's clearly not sustainable. It's impossible. But it's politically expedient, and it just keeps happening. So, I don't want to mislead you. If you were to take this on, it would be the hardest thing any government in Canada has ever done. You are considered provincial and national leaders in environmental sustainability now. Were you to take this task on, you would be provincial and international leaders in fiscal sustainability. But it would be incredibly hard. When I say you can't possibly get out of this without changing the expectations of your citizens, I mean you have to take on politically important and economically important groups and help convince them that they're going to get less from government. And I don't mean canceling 10 grand to the David Suzuki Foundation. I'm not suggesting you pay 10 grand to the David Suzuki Foundation right now. I'm just saying it's not somebody that you feel is disposable. It's minor hockey. It's seniors. It's the swimmers. It's the Chamber of Commerce. You can't get there without taking on people who would rather, whose expectations currently are that you will serve them rather than reduce their services. But the default position is some future council and some future group of staff are gonna have to deal with this, and so are some future group of citizens. Won't be me, I'm gonna be retired long before then, probably won't be you unless you're all planning to run 4 times in a row. So personally, there is no consequence to us not taking this on. The consequences are all to the citizens of future generations, to our community. That, my friends, is either socialism or democracy, depending on how you look at it. But if you look at that little cartoon, who's the taxpayer, who's government, and who's the special interest group? So I wish this only happened in socialist countries, but it happens every day in Dawson Creek. So we balance our budget every year, so our specific circumstances must be fine, right? Except that we have increased operational spending, including water and sewer, 80% in the last 10 years. We have our own internal policy setting targets and limits on what our ratio of debt charges to operational revenue ought to be. Our average is already over our target. It's going to be more over our target by 2017. If you back fair share revenue out, we're actually over our limit that we self-imposed. Municipal taxes on the average business in Dawson Creek have increased 90% in the last 8 years. Residential taxes in Dawson Creek have increased 54% in the last 8 years. It hasn't led to tax revolt because the numbers are low. $6,700 for business, $1,500 for resident. But the trend lines are not sustainable. In the last 10 years, our fair share revenue's gone up 222%. We're using 74% of it for program services. If we were to somehow lose fair share and you wanted the same programs and services, another $15 a thousand for business, another $450 for residents, add that to those figures on the left. We just did a fair share review. There was let's say that there was no action taken out of it, but our awareness of the dangers in our reliance on fair share certainly went up. We had a risk management review that highlighted a number of financial risks on the horizon for the city. Most particularly, our tangible capital asset program has provided our first systematic look at our infrastructure and what's going to have to be done in the future. That's backed by a number of individual plans that you've all been receiving and chewing on, including, say, the recent sanitary sewer master plan. The totality of that work is just unequivocal. We have on the horizon a huge amount of expenditure necessary for the refurbishment, upgrade, replacement of our buildings, our roads, our sidewalks, our storm sewers, our water distribution, our sanitary sewage treatment. And it is much steeper than that 80% growth in operational spending you've seen. If we decide that we need to invest in a pipeline to a new water source, that line is going to turn vertical. And it doesn't matter what you call our revenue. It's an unnecessary distraction to focus on fair share because it doesn't matter where we're getting the revenue. It's not enough to fund all of the operational programs we have now and all of the capital investments we have to make in the future. It's not enough. So what next? We're not going to get help from the province and the feds. They're still in denial about their own problems, let alone ours. Our citizens are not aware of this problem or interested in this problem, and they certainly are not going to change those expectations developed over 8,000 years and particularly over the last few hundred unless they are brought to that realization. They will not stumble upon it. We can tinker around the edges, but we will not address the problem. Suppose we have a service that's $1 million service, and we say it's got 10% waste in it. We're going to cut 10% out. This is a very popular thing to say. It's a good way to get elected. I advise you to say that. You'll probably get reelected saying that. And let's pretend it's true. It's not, but let's pretend it is. So that $100,000 service is now a $900,000 service. Wonderful. All the fat's gone out of it. Wonderful. Then we apply inflationary forces. We apply the municipal price index, which is, a few points higher than the consumer price index, and it's running right now around 4%. So the first year you add $36,000 to the cost of that service, and then you compound that and add about another 40 the second year, and about midway through the third year, it's costing you more than $1 million again. And all the waste has gone out of it. What's wrong with this picture? The only way you can make systemic changes that are going to address these future expenditure needs is some of those $1 million services have to be gone entirely. They have to no longer be there to have inflationary forces applied to them. There are no quick fixes. The totality of the work, in some of the work that I have referenced for you in the report or attached to the report, there is different approaches, there is lack of consensus. In all of them, there is a consensus on this. This is not going to be easy. This is a long and grinding journey. It is not as simple as picking some pieces out of the puzzle and setting up some policy choices and everything's hunky. It is the expectations of the citizens have got to come down to the resourcing level that's available. That's a transformative change. It's the most difficult kind of change. It takes the longest, and it will be far and away the most painful thing any local government in Canada has ever done. You are getting nowhere until the electorate feels the sense of urgency to undergo that fundamental change. Particularly, this is an intergenerational matter. This is not about short-term financial solvency for the existing citizens. This is about intergenerational fairness. This is about deciding in context or in consultation with your citizens what is an acceptable basket of services into the future, what is an affordable basket, what infrastructure investments have to be made to secure those services, and getting on with that plan at a level that is significantly different and lower than it is now. That is not to suggest the quality of life in the community has to go down. It is to suggest that local government can't be the people who supply that full quality, improved quality of life. The model of the Rotary Lake is the model we're going to see going forward. Rather than government sustaining that quality of life piece, community groups are going to sustain those quality of life pieces. Or there's going to be commercial transactions. Private individuals are going to supply some of these services. But the future, in the future, it's going to be impossible for local government to supply all of these quality of life issues. That doesn't mean that it will necessarily happen in the fashion I'm talking about. It could be we will reach crisis and it will come out of crisis. However, it's happening. It's going to come. The math is unequivocal. There simply is not enough money in the world for the way we're set up right now. If you're going to take this on, that engagement with your citizens and that dialogue, you're going to have to do pretty much nothing else in a strategic fashion next year. It will take up all of your resources and time. And probably at the end of it, you end up running on a mandate of a significantly smaller basket of services into the future. So, if you've done the groundwork with your citizens, if what you're suggesting has been canvassed with them, if they have come to consensus around some issues or at least developed a sense of urgency necessary, they'll go along. Otherwise, they're going to just see you as doom prophesizing whack jobs. It's a very, very difficult thing I am suggesting that you do. And it's not going to surprise me at all if you decide not to. In fact, every other politician in every other government, in every other Western democracy, has decided not to. I don't know if you're up for it. I don't know if your citizens are up for it. I give you 3 quotes from Winston Churchill. One of them is, the quality of a politician is judged by the animosities they excite. So the more people hate you, the better job you're doing. That men occasionally stumble over the truth, but most pick themselves up and hurry off as if nothing ever happened. And to build has to be the slow and laborious task of years, but to destroy can be the thoughtless act of a single day. Those are useful insights on democracy. And finally, I leave you with what Henry Ford famously said, which is whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. Thank you.
So I suggest we have a cup of coffee to help us with our processing skills, and we'll get this screen up and the computer. But thank you, Jim, for an excellent presentation. And we'll have a discussion about it after a 5-minute recess, if that's okay with everyone?
Sure.
Is that okay? Okay.
Yep.
So if we can reconvene. Many, many years ago, when I was at the University of London, did some stuff at the London School of Economics, I can remember reading some of the sayings, if you like, of Karl Marx. And Karl Marx, I'm going to assert, Jim, predicted just what Deloitte has talked about in his writings about democratic governments and their eventual downfall. Jim has used a number of quotes, and before opening up for discussion, I couldn't help but, and I'm not going to delve into his biblical quotes, but one quote that's always stayed with me, written by an Anglican, the Archbishop of Canterbury, head of the Worldwide Anglican Church. And he's basically said, we in the Western world must have less so that others can have more. That was Archbishop Temple, 1936, not the current Archbishop. Okay, so let's throw it open for discussion. That's the intention, right, Jim?
Yes, I don't know if anyone wishes to move the recommendation of the report or not.
Yes, well, there is a recommendation at the very back. Somebody wishes to do that, we put it on the table, we can discuss it, and Councillor Schumann.
Yeah, so I would move the report number 13-117 from the Chief Administrator Officer regarding the fiscal gap be received, and further that the fiscal gap initiative be referred to the 2014 strategic planning with a view to making the item Council's overriding strategic priority for 2014.
Seconder,
I'll second it for discussion.
Councillor Wilbur. Discussion. Councillor McFadden.
I don't know if we can wait that long. If we're going to start doing something, I think we need to do it sooner than later. That's been one of the downfalls historically of councils of, well, we'll put it off for next year, or we'll put it off for the next council, or we'll put it on the back burner, and it just gets, and nothing ever happens. So 214 is fine, but I'm wondering if we couldn't do it sooner. And then just a question for Jim, if I can, are we voting here? Did I vote or?
What?
No, we're just talking now.
Talking? Question for Jim now or later, Charlie?
No?
Yeah.
Given the position, Jim, and the mindset and of the federal and provincial governments in their state of financial affairs, do you think it's possible for the municipal government to carry on and take care of some of these things now alone without their involvement?
So looking at the literature that's reviewed in the report, a couple points. First off, I'm not going to do dueling quotes with Acting Mayor Parcel, so I'm not going to mention General Sue, but if you try to do something on your own as a council to show that you are decisive without bringing the citizens along first, you're going to fail. That's what the overwhelming universal experience to date has been. So the reason it's not till 2014 is because you will have no success until you address the expectations of your citizens, and you can only do that by engaging them, informing them, and listening to them. So a series of budget cuts made by the 7 people, because you won't be doing that until the next budget, and there will be a seated mayor at that point, is going to fail. They have all failed. It's going to fail. What you need to do is have reduced expectations by your citizens. And yes, you can always have that dialogue with your citizens. Many things are outside your control. A whole lot of them are. But your citizens' expectations is something that the community can actually determine. They have, always. We don't have a multiplex because 7 people decided to have it. We have a multiplex because the citizens voted for it. We can decide to not have a multiplex in the same fashion. I'm not suggesting that that is the answer. I'm just saying all of our services are on the table in such a discussion. And it's a community determined effort. And you literally can establish your own little world here where there is fiscal sustainability because that's what the local citizens want. The sacrifices would be deep, but they can do it without the help of the other levels of government.
Thank you, and just to follow up, are you aware of any municipality that has ventured off on a program like this in recent times?
Well, as I was saying to a couple folk here, the point in the report is Deloitte, KPMG, UBCM, FCM, they've looked and can't find anybody that is actually making progress on these topics or even actively engaging them. But on a smaller scale, yes. There are many situations in municipalities where a proposed expenditure is put through a vetting process that would be similar to the big process you're talking about. And there are some situations where crisis is in place, the mill's closed, and they've had to look through these situations. Normally, in those cases, they have gone to short-term solutions in the faith that growth will happen, the mill will reopen, and then we can get back on track. One example, and I'm not going to name the place because it was told to me in confidence, but they went through a series of citizen roundtables in much the same fashion that the Fair Share Review did, where citizens, focus group citizens were selected to sit at a table and try to come up with cuts to the budget. But they imposed a rule saying you could only propose a cut to a service that you regularly use. You couldn't propose cutting somebody else's service. You could only propose cutting your own service. They met for 2 days, couldn't come up with a single recommendation. So I'm telling you, this task is going to be extremely difficult.
Thank you.
Councillor Schumann.
Thank you. So to Councillor McFadden's idea of getting started sooner rather than later, I think that putting it forward to the 2014 strategic planning will give us some time to finish out the strategic priorities that we already have for this year without burdening our staff further with this. And I don't know, I think that once we get to strategic planning, and really hash this out, we may come up with a different view, a different idea of moving forward on it. So I like the idea of putting it to our strategic priority planning in 2014, and this is going to be a big job, and reading through the information, we all have to come to an understanding of what the situation is to begin with, and the engagement of the citizens is going to be key, so it's going to be a big job, obviously. Thanks.
Councillor Malcolmson.
Good morning, Jim. I did appreciate your presentation. There was some very, very good considerations in there, and I did. One of the things I hoped to learn before I walked in here this morning was, well, at least one of the things I hoped would be illustrated this morning was the relevance of the situation across Canada and America to Dawson Creek, how exactly it was applicable to Dawson Creek, and I think you did a good job of that. I have had similar considerations and similar thoughts that you outlined recently. Maybe I look at it a little bit more positively than negatively. I'm not sure, but I think that people naturally do want the best for their community. Communities are built on optimism. Why wouldn't people want great services for everybody in their community? It's a no-brainer. But I also think that people assume that all services that the municipality present to the public for consideration are able to be delivered responsibly. You know, maybe that's not prime consideration in people's mind before they start advocating for something heavily, or maybe they see the organization as maybe I'll step back. People's view of the community is sometimes not as wide as it's not as wide as some other people's. You know, some people don't really consider all in the community when they try to advocate for services that are provided by all in the community. I think it's our responsibility to provide adequate, appropriate levels of service for the citizens, not over and above and not well below the organization's capacities. Our organization is one that needs to keep in mind with the needs and desires of the citizens. Yeah, I think we regularly need to analyze the relevance of all the services that we provide. So, that's my 2 cents. I just wanted to maybe get that off my chest.
Councillor Kenny.
I'd like to thank Jim for that report. It certainly gave me a deeper understanding of how far back we go and how we came to where we are today, and that we're not alone, that we're accompanied by the rest of the world, and how our expenses have risen and our revenues have decreased, and our wants and our expected needs have increased, and how complacent we've become. We have this great democracy, this great democratic society that we boast about and we're very proud of. And yet we're not warring or anything, but we're still not free of problems. And you know, as far as services, like, you know, looking at our services over the future and how we deliver them, I'm sure there's going to be lots of examples coming along, because the rest of the country is in the same situation that Dawson Creek is. And so hopefully, and I think, you know, Jim, through your peers, this discussion is happening certainly, you know, across the province and across the country. So, you know, people are starting to put plans into action, at least putting their thinking patterns into action, that something has to be done. But, you know, in relation to Dawson Creek, because I know this is going to be on the website and it's going to be in the papers, our services are pretty much the same as every other community. It's not like we are, you know, gluttons and that we have all these extra services that other communities don't have. Other communities also have hockey rinks, they have pools, they have soccer fields, they have baseball fields. They have all the, you know, the services that we have. And so it's not like, you know, what's happened over the many years that Dawson Creek's been incorporated, that they've had this rogue councils every year increasing the spending. Our infrastructure, you know, what are you going to do about your infrastructure? It gets old and it has to be replaced, and the time has come and it's going to get worse over the years, and we have to prepare. But I'm all in favor, you know, that we look at this seriously and start to educate and involve the community in a process that will close that fiscal gap slowly over the next however many years it may take, you know, to happen. So I support that we continue our strategic priorities as they've been outlined, and we're already 50-60% into completing them, and we've already invested the money in order to carry them out for 2013. So I support that we look at this seriously in 2014, get a communication strategy going, and look at a well outlined plan on how we're going to approach this over a period of time, not just in 2014, a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan where there's steps each year on, and we complete those steps, that we can measure those steps. And Some of it'll be financial, some of it'll just be the awareness in the community on approaches on how we accomplish it.
Councillor Wilbur.
Oh, okay.
Wilbur, yeah.
You
Councillor
say-
Wilbur.
Oh, okay.
I was going to say Demery could go first. Yeah, no, I want to thank Jim too for the presentation and all the information. I actually did enjoy reading through that a few times. We're in a unique situation where we're having growing pains. We're growing slowly but surely. We are, and this is definitely not a trend we want to continue on with. And I do agree that looking at it in 2014, our strategic priorities is the right place. I think we have to complete what we're doing. And I do agree with Councillor Kenny that this needs to be a very long-term plan and a slow process, and we need to bring the community with us. There's no immediate answer, and there's, it's going to take structuring, but it has to happen, and our community needs to know that they're a part of it and why it needs to happen. So I'm going to support the recommendation that we look at this at our strategic priorities in 2014.
Councillor Malkinson.
Maybe just a question right to Jim. What kind of process do you envision coming out of strategic planning next year? Consultation, obviously, that seems to be the one of the predominant approaches in your report. You know that you can't make progress on this without the public's consideration, gumption, drive, and base. Yeah. What kind of process do you envision next year?
Through your worship, both the Deloitte Red Ink study and the KPMG University of Toronto study suggest processes. They're quite similar, actually, and what I would suggest is that Shelley and I will look at those two and give you a proposed plan of action. But both of them agree that how you do this is you start by stopping the gap growing. Then you start the process of reversing the gap. So it is exactly as Councillor Wilbur and Councillor Kenny have said, you are going over the cliff, will kill the people in the car, but so will, changing direction too quickly and rolling the car will kill the people in the car also. So you have a series of stages. And in terms of what you can do in a short term, you can certainly not make the problem worse in the short term. Without looking forward to what the future basket of services will look like, it'd be a really good idea if you stopped adding services right now, just until you've had that discussion. That would be, be really excellent if you might say no to the lady about the expanded parking at the soccer park. The other example I was going to give you and forgot about was we had a very successful community event about a community park provided by a developer under subdivision and what kind of amenities might go there. We just had it this past weekend. The citizens were very engaged, but one of the things they said is, wait a sec, in this subdivision there are no sidewalks. And so we have a park, but no sidewalks by which children can get to the park. So you should build sidewalks. Sounds good, but you don't have the money to do that. Going forward, you might establish a process by which developers had to put in sidewalks, but for the community to take on retrofitting all areas without sidewalks to have sidewalks, it's an expectation you simply cannot meet. So yes, there are things you can do in the short term so that the gap doesn't widen until you're getting to the plan, but the models that are there all say it's an education piece. It starts with not widening the gap, and then it moves to strategies to reduce the gap, and with the citizens along with you the whole way.
You might have answered it sort of in your answer, but maybe I just want a little more clarification. If the gap is made of, as you say in your report, of expectations from the citizenry, future expectations, that citizen expectations won't be able to meet any level of revenue, how do you expect to stop that from growing immediately? Are you talking about real things or expectations?
I don't believe until you do the work that you can change the citizen expectation. You can just change your response to it for now.
Oh, gotcha.
And this would be a good time to do that because you're not running for election until 2014. So you can get away with a few no's right now. So now's a good time to give some no's. I'm mindful of the fact that you have a mayoralty election coming in September. And it's difficult at this point to say what will be promised in that election and what the incoming mayor is going to have as their agenda for you, and that might change all of this. It's another reason why immediate work could well be wasted. Not only would you abandon the other strategic work you have in process, but you run the risk that you would be undertaking initiatives that a new political dynamic after mayoralty election changes. So all I'm saying is it wouldn't be really, if you've taken on the task that you're going to engage your citizens and you're going to try to address the fiscal gap, making intentional choices to widen the gap in that context would probably be the wrong thing to do.
I apologize, I just saw the gap. Well, yeah, I understand what he said. Do you mind if I keep
Go
going?
ahead, no.
You identify in your report property tax as just a sort of a problem that exists in itself. Do you see out of this process advocating for some sort of a change there, objective?
I would expect if there's going to be a long-term answer for this for municipalities, that whole relationship about how your revenues are generated, and not necessarily the amount of revenue, but the type of revenue, may well have to change. You have areas, as Councillor Wilbur says, you are fortunate that you are a growing and progressing community. You do actually have 2 Tim Hortons and a Walmart that you previously aspired to have, and it has happened here. You have a growing tax base, but along with that come demands for services where property tax is just doesn't make any sense never mind which government should pay for something, which tax should pay for something. So if it's a service to property, makes some real good sense that property would pay for that tax. But if it's a service to citizens, maybe it makes more sense if income taxes or consumption taxes pay for that service, which is a different issue than which government should pay for it. So I would expect there will be reforms. If we're ever going to address this problem short of crisis, there will be reforms. If you look at the KPMG report, it particularly says that whole issue of what taxes are applied and which governments have access to taxes is going to require reform if the problem is going to be fully addressed. So for you, that's an advocacy piece. You do not have the authority to do that on your own. So yeah, of course, like any of the important work we do, some pieces of it will be your own actions and some pieces of it will be your advocacy for others to act.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, well, I have a few questions and comments. This is to you directly, Jim, and correct me if my memory's failing me here. The first time I recall you using the term fiscal gap was in a council meeting, and I believe attached to that presentation was a figure like of cutting, council beginning to cut expenditures of about 2.79 million. Where does that recommendation stand in light of this presentation?
Well, the short answer to that is the more I delved into it, the more I realized I was making the same mistake that everyone else who's addressed this problem has made, which is that somehow objectively derived measures, which really just means they're subjective to me only, we're generating figures that might or may not be supported by a public process. So in general magnitude, when you look at our the work coming out of the tangible assets initiative and the various reports you've got, we are in that area where capital expenditure money is going to have to go up by that $2 to $3 million a year. But that presupposes that we'll need all that infrastructure in the future. And it's possible that the citizens will willingly give up some of those services and hence the infrastructure that supports them. And so that would bring the number to a different place. So yes, I've used that figure, and I was wrong to do so.
That's that's understandable. We all, as more information comes and reflection, appreciate that about you. I was not elected to provide more services. I'm not aware of any councillor in this last election that we all took part in were promising more services. But I can't help but reflect on a number of things. You know, sometimes structural deficits are as a direct result of a policy decision of government. And a good example of that, and I'm not an expert in this area, but I am voicing, I guess, what I thought was a consensus of economists. When the federal government reduced the GST rate, economists were saying, you are creating a structural deficit in our economy by doing that. And I think a lot of people believe that many of our problems in this city are related to decisions of past councils and how fair share is used. What is your opinion about the impact of how we've used fair share on the impending need for capital money to deal with infrastructure?
Well, actually, I think the discussion around fair share it's illustrative, but it is largely a red herring. As I am at pains to point out in the report, and as all of the KPMG does not write 700 pages or whatever the heck it is about Dawson Creek. They're writing about every government, every local government. So if all the problems are that you've made some bad choices on fair share, that would be localized. Dawson Creek would be the only place having this problem. It's not the case. If fair share was converted to taxation, which is what the area originally asked for, was the right to directly tax the unincorporated industry. Suppose that happens in the next round of fair share. So it's just property taxation like any other. You still need to take more of it and put it into capital rather than operational. It doesn't matter whether it's a grant or a tax or a fee or a charge or host revenue from the gaming center or lottery winnings. Doesn't matter where your revenue is coming from. Too much of it, at the moment, it's being distributed in a mix between operational and capital. The capital need is going up in the future. So unless you're gathering much more, the only way to make that work is to reduce the amount in the operational. It just doesn't matter whether it's fair share or anything. Every statement made about how more of fair share should go to capital is true of every conversation about fees and charges and every conversation about property taxation. In the future, more of all that revenue is going to have to go for capital rather than operational. But I should say, that conversation is the best answer to the people who tell you that we don't have a revenue problem, or we don't have a
Spending.
Revenue problem,
Yeah,
we have a
yeah.
spending problem. If they believed that was true, they'd have never mentioned fair share to you. Fair share is a revenue. We got revenue problems.
I appreciated one of your quotes in your report, Ronald Reagan, who I think came up with that quote that
Yes, he
was
did.
used a lot by the Conservative candidate in the last provincial election. And remind me, maybe it's interesting for the media, that what was the net result of his, didn't he drive the American economy into a greater deficit?
Whether America was a better place to live or not under the Ronald Reagan administration is an issue for the citizens of the United States. But in terms of just the factual annual deficit, it tripled under Ronald Reagan. And if you do the same, if you address only one part of your problem, you're going to make your fiscal gap problem significantly worse.
Yeah. Just a couple of other comments. And you know, I'm a CBC, a BBC junkie, and I recall many occasions the governor of the Bank of Canada, who is now the governor of the Bank of England, making his pleas, I guess, to the Canadian people, desperately wanting us to avoid the repeating what happened in the United States over the housing crisis, saying that, we've got to rein in your expenditures in totality, and particularly the mortgages that people were incurring. And we know that his pleas and his statement of why just were unheeded until the federal Minister of Finance changed all the rules around mortgages. And my realty friends in Dawson Creek tell me that has really impacted this community in the numbers of people who find themselves not eligible for a mortgage have really, really climbed. And all I'm trying to say is sometimes government can try to coach and cajole, but sometimes it takes definitive action to change people's behavior. Transformational change as a term has been used widely in both theology and in education. And as Jim correctly, in my opinion, or Deloitte states that it's a long-term process, and change is an inside-out approach. And what concerns me about the process is, I guess, what's the likelihood of its success? Our whole economy is based upon consumerism. We live in a time when people want to be entertained, and they have a certain style of vehicle, and our whole marketing is for them to change it and buy it. So we have marketing pressures, we have people's habits, we have people wanting more and more. And whilst I recognize the wisdom, are we in a situation whereby we really think we can change the expectations of people? Generation who've really grown up getting what they basically want. I'm just not that hopeful. And you correctly say it's an incredibly difficult task. And realistically, as we deal with the gap as you address it, and as it's defined, I see that the elected body having to make decisions that may be not supported by the overall majority. And as I say, I wasn't elected to provide more services. If people dissatisfied with the direction, surely they express that at election time, and that's the check and balance of our democratic process. Sometimes government has to lead, even though it's not necessarily driven or accepted by the community. Let's take the example, and I know I'm venturing forth into an area here that maybe is not prudent, but I just have to say that maybe the risk management assessment over water, which came up with the expression that, that one of the biggest risks is making the wrong decision. But the populace, through the initial, and I stress the word initial, consultation process, has chosen the most expensive route. And as you state in your presentation, Jim, about how the gap, I think you said it would basically climb vertically. And so if I use water as an example, council, from its point of view of the economic health of the city, might well have to take a course that is different than the public has initially expressed. Now, I recognize that through the education process, which is a critical part of what we're about, in our governance principles, we talk about, an educated and informed public. I want to state that my experience has been, when we do provide the information, people's opinions do change. And this, I'm just using the water as an example. If we did no more in the education bit, I can see council having to maybe make a decision that is not driven by the wishes. And so as I looked at this transformational piece, whilst I certainly embrace it conceptually, I just can't see it working in the next decade at least. And is that sufficient time? That's my question, Jim.
Well, through your worship, a couple points on that. Exactly what you're talking about has been the underpinning of every conversation Shelley and I have had in the last 6 months about this topic. So we get together and we watch TED Talks.
Okay, that's good stuff.
Well, again, I do not take the position that government should be run like a business, but if you're looking for expertise on how you sell a product to a consumer, clearly business is more expert than government in that. And there is a whole lot of work going on right now. Very moving talk by the late founder of Apple, for instance, along about how people are motivated by not what you're doing, but why you're doing it. And that they need to believe what you believe if they're going to buy your product. And so I would suggest it is at least worth the effort to try to convince the citizens of Dawson Creek why you feel you need to do this. Because if you pass that barrier, the evidence is that they will buy your product, that they will care less about exactly what you're doing and more about why you are doing it. So, that's the conceptual approach around it. Whether it will succeed or not, I'm not going to give you a flavor of that, because I don't know. You don't know till you start. So that's one piece. Second piece is, I think it is certainly true that there is a mandate achieved by local government politicians. It used to be, when I started in the business, every 2 years. Now it is every 3, and every indication is the provincial government is going to convert it to every 4. But we need in order for transformational change to occur, we need the citizens to affirm this why we are doing what we are doing, election after election, because it's at least a decade of effort, and in our current context, that's at least 3 local government councils, and it might be more, to truly get there. And so if we're in a situation where Council 1 makes some hard choices, but they are not hard choices that the citizens affirm, and so a new council comes in 3 or 4 years hence and reverses those, and we do that for a few times, we'll actually go over the cliff while we're farting around. That's exactly what's happening in the United States. It's exactly what's happening in the United States. That's why bringing the citizens along is the key to the whole thing. I'll give you an example from Dawson Creek. We got in extremely difficult financial times in the late 80s and early 90s. And sacrifices had to be made in government service that were crisis motivated rather than aimed at any particular future. And one of the choices was to close down the horse barns at the Exhibition Association. And it was necessary, and it was accepted in some fashion, but it didn't change the expectation, which is that you as a community would provide horse barns. For a period of time, a volunteer group took over running the horse barns and gradually got more and more support from council, until eventually you built an $8 million facility for them. And you're providing them, depends on your point of view, but $50, $60, $80, $100,000 of value every year to keep running those. So we went from closing them entirely to building an $8 million sparkly facility for them and funding their annual operations. And the reason we did that is their expectation never changed over that time. The city's fiscal circumstances changed and how we could meet that demand changed, but their expectation never changed. The long-term answer is that the expectation changes. And because otherwise you get these, every hard and painful thing one council does is overturned at the next election, and we just don't get there.
Councillor Kenny.
Yeah, I agree that the shift and change is going to be difficult. I think with the water, like with the Sure Water campaign, I don't think we're done with that.
No.
You know, we're certainly not done. It created an awareness, but I don't believe that 66%. I don't believe in that number. Like I know a lot of people were surveyed, and we came up with a 66%, but that's not everybody. That's not everybody putting in their vote. And we just started really, like, over the last couple of years, having people have to pay for water now, and changing that way of thinking, the putting the water. I hate to say restrictions on. I wish we had another word for that.
Conservation measures.
Conservation measures on the water, like people buck that because it's change, and they're used to getting something free, and now they have to pay for it. They used to water their lawn all the time. Now they have to do it on alternate days, and everybody grumbled about it, and but the grumbling is getting less and less and less. It's not like it was a couple of years ago. People are starting to change with that. But in some work that I'm doing in the community right now, the water, it's still the big number one, and it's still education. It's all about the education. They're not getting all the information. They're getting. They're not making their decisions and their comments on all the information, and I think we still have to continue to get that out there in a really aggressive way. And so I think we've already have started, as far as with this fiscal gap, I think we've already started the process in a way through our water conservation, and through having people paying for water, through people making that shift in their thinking. I think we've started something already that's good, and there's going to be an expectation for like they're not going to be so shocked when we slowly implement more measures or more changes in how we do things in order to close that gap.
Doesn't your illustration though about the conservation of water, was that something that came from the community, or was that something that came from the provincial government? If we need to have at least a conservation measure in your water scheme. I'm just trying to say, I think it was a top-down.
The impetus behind the public conversation came from the provincial government, just as the tangible capital assets work came from changes the government made. But it triggered community dialogue rather than an edict. The truth of the matter is, if the expectation is services can simply be added, then the water line certainly has a place. If the conversation, and this is the work by KPMG, suggesting that the first thing you do is establish that the trade-offs are necessary, that's how you stop the gap from increasing. You slow the growth, you stop the growth, and then you reverse the growth of the gap. How you stop the growth is you make everything a trade-off. You make that community dialogue. Yes, you can have this shiny new thing, but these old things have to go. We haven't approached the community with the water line on those terms, and we don't know what the result would be. It may well be that it is so important to people that they would willingly get. I don't want to suggest any trade-offs now, because that just inflames the situation, but there may be things that the services that the community now receives that they would do without in order to have that water line. We don't know that because we haven't had the conversation with them.
Councillor Kenny.
If they're that passionate, or that firm on their decision, if it was the whole community, then maybe there'd be a referendum on if there's a water line. If you have the pipeline, then you're going to pay for it. So this is what's going to cost you. I think we did the same thing with the multiplex. This is what's going to cost you to have the multiplex, and people voted on that, and so maybe it'll come out like that in the end.
Yes, ultimately there would have to be that. Any other comments at all? Okay. Well, I will be voting against the recommendation. Notion being that it's a very serious matter and that we need to reflect on it. And when we do have a new mayor, we can possibly discuss it prior to budget deliberations in this fall. So I'm going to vote against it just because I think it should be tabled for a while. Okay. Any other questions or comments?
You could move to table it if you wanted.
It's on the. I don't know if I procedurally can do that, Jim. Can I move that it be tabled now, because there is a motion duly made and seconded that needs to be determined? I'm not amending the motion.
No, there's a motion to refer rather than table. Table means to later in this meeting, and I don't think
Oh, no,
that's
no,
your
no,
concept.
no.
But refer to some specified future date or after some specified future event, you could do. It would need a majority vote.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'm making the motion to refer this to a meeting of council October of 2013.
I want to talk first, so I don't want to second it, or else we won't be able to discuss it. Motion to
Yeah.
tables, not.
I'm not
Discuss
making a
it.
motion to table. It's a motion to
Referring.
refer. Is that
Oh, I
non-debatable?
apologize.
We're just referring.
It's debatable as to whether it should be referred, not as to the merits of the motion.
Right.
Neat.
So, no, I will, if I may, withdraw my motion until you've had your time to talk.
Sure, sure.
I don't want to wish to cut anyone off and
Oh, you don't.
comments
You
on
do a
this.
good job. You're hoping to do this so that we can, I suppose, consider things in the meantime? Is that that's the basis of your?
Yes, it's a major topic.
Yep.
I really appreciate the work staff is doing on this for us. I really do accept the concept that for change to be sustained, the desired, and Deloitte's work would say maybe the necessary work is to engage the community. I strongly believe in that. But I want to, I think it's such a big thing, I would like to have more discussion
Yeah.
amongst council members, with staff present, of course.
Mm-hmm.
We have a election of a mayor that will bring our elected body to a fullness, and I don't see that this is a pressing decision. The recommendation of Jim's is to refer it to the strategic planning in 2014, so I'd see no damage being done to the recommendation. It's just that I think I would like to have a fuller discussion of this. This discussion that I think every council member has taken part in today
Is good.
on this topic has been excellent.
Yep.
It's good to hear what people are thinking about this. Jim's answers have been educational to me, okay? And I would just like to continue that process before making. I'm not a person who automatically thinks that we defer decisions. But this is a big one.
Oh yeah.
Just like the water one is a big one,
Mhm.
and maybe council members will have further pieces of information that they want. I mean, one of my thoughts is, how is this going to unfold? I mean, I'd be deadly against hiring consultants and outside staff when we're talking about narrowing the fiscal gap. Is that implicit in this? I don't know, but I just would like some more time for council discussion and reflection. Councillor Kenny.
I don't see the point in referring this to any other time. It is something that's going to take, as we said, a long period of time to roll out, as Jim's report definitely demonstrated with the Deloitte, and I don't see the point in deferring it, or in not just going with the original motion, because when it comes to the 2014 strategic planning, we do have plenty of time to think about this, and there will be conversations between now and January about this. I don't see this as this topic just discontinuing. I'm having expectations as new things, as new insight develops, that that Jim will bring that to us, as he has always updated us on all the elements of what it requires to run the city and make sure that we're being fiscally responsible and making sure that we're doing the right thing. So I really don't see the point in changing the original motion, because the discussion is going to happen. It has to happen. It's all been laid out there, and we will. And it took hundreds of years for it to come to this point, as it was demonstrated. And so I see that, through our strategic planning process in January, that we can review this and do it properly. And I'm sure that the new elected mayor, there's plenty of time for them to come up to speed too. They're not going to be able to come into their seat right after election and make an informed decision if you're to put this to a vote once the new mayor's here, because they've been here for a week, and then you're going to put this in front of them? What difference is that going to make? It's going to take them till January to absorb what we just heard today. So I'm going with the original motion.
Any other comments? Jim,
2
first
points
you.
of clarification,
Yeah.
Your Worship. So, strat planning, I had forgotten, but strat planning this year is scheduled December 17th and 18th, so it's not January, it's December. The intention right now on our current meeting date is the newly elected mayor would be inaugurated at September 23rd meeting, and then there are 2 meetings in October, which are the 7th and 21st. So in the event that you're proceeding with this motion, you're probably looking at either the 7th or 21st of October, which is probably about 2 months before strat planning.
Thank you. Councillor Wilbur.
Actually, what caught my attention with that is the unique situation of the by-election and having a new mayor. And when you get here, it's both feet in the water and you're running. So our mayor's going to have a lot to catch up with. And in all fairness, should have the opportunity to read this before we go into strategic planning and get up to speed to where we're at. So I have no problem referring it to an October meeting.
Councillor Schumann.
I won't be voting to refer it to October. I think that, we're already sort of referring it till December, and the new mayor is elected September 14th. I think there's plenty of time, and there's no sense in, we got Councilor McFadden over here. He wants to do it tomorrow, for heaven's sakes. So
Just look how desperate
I
he
don't
is.
see any point in referring it either. I think there's a lot of time between now and strategic planning in order for ourselves and the new mayor to get up to speed. And there's nothing saying that come strategic planning, we're rolling out the plan then. That's just the start of it. That's just going to be the beginning of it. And I see no point in deferring this.
Councillor Atkinson.
I'm just going to reply to the comments that you made
Sure.
all those minutes ago. In terms of, considering the argument of having more time for discussion and more time for consideration, and this is a big consideration for council to make, what is the difference between referring this to the meeting in October versus referring it to strategic planning? There's still time for consideration both
Okay.
ways.
Good
Sorry.
question. May I respond to
Sure,
that?
yeah, you go ahead.
Well, the recommendation that's before council is that this initiative be referred to the 2014 strategic planning with a view to making that item council's overriding strategic priority.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that means that essentially,
We've
to
already
my
made it.
I can't help but think, well, why are we going to have strategic planning? Departments might need it, but if this is going to be the overriding and we're closing fiscal gap, but we haven't got the plan, this would be the council's strategic plan. And so be it. But I think, in courtesy, a new mayor should have the opportunity of his or her input in this, and there's no need to make a rush decision on this.
Okay. So maybe a An amendment to strike out the last little bit with a view to making that item council's overriding strategic priority for 2014. How about that?
Just to gain a caution, we are now debating whether to refer.
Yes,
We're not
this
debating
we-
the
we-
original motion.
Yeah.
We need to deal with, I think we can.
The motion to defer isn't on the floor, though. Didn't Charlie not do that?
Oh, I'm
I-
sorry,
I
that's
didn't-
correct.
No,
Chair.
I didn't say it's not before, so I think Councillor Schumann, then I'll put the motion
sure.
forward. If there's a seconder,
Yep,
you can
gotcha.
debate it against. Councillor Schumann.
So we're sending this to strategic planning.
Mm-hmm.
We've sent a lot of things to strategic planning, and it
With-
hasn't come out that that was our strategic
Yep.
plan. So when we get to strategic planning, and, you know, maybe we do have to change the last sentence, amend
Okay.
the last sentence on it, as you're suggesting, to make sure that, but in my view, we're sending this to strategic planning. It doesn't mean that, you know, we're all gonna come together and say this is so once we're in strategic planning. We've seen things fall off the table in strategic planning
And after.
over the years. So when I vote in favor of this recommendation, I am not voting in favor that this will be so.
That's what
I'm-
it says.
Well, then let's amend it.
So I'd like to move that this recommendation be referred to an October meeting of council. Is there a seconder? No seconder?
Sorry, Charlie.
That's fine. So then we have a recommendation. Do you wish to make an amendment to the recommendation?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I move that we amend the motion by striking out after with and ending at the end of the recommendation.
So the last word would appear in the motion is the word planning.
That's correct.
Is that correct? Duncan?
Why do,
Yes, yeah, that's correct.
Oh.
What did you think?
I was just thinking ending it at initiative be referred to 2014 strategic planning. Is that what you're saying?
Yep,
Did it
that's
stop
what I'm
there?
saying.
Okay,
Yep.
I'm sorry I didn't catch it. Thank you.
Okay, seconder. Councillor Schumann. Okay. Any further discussion? None. All those in favour? Opposed? I'm opposed. So that, I believe, we've... I wonder if the media has any questions. This is an open meeting.
Yes.
So, media, do you have any questions?
I have a real quick one, if you don't mind.
Yes.
I was just hoping for some brief history, kind of how did we get to this point? How did we decide that we wanted this report from Jim? Just, I don't know if it was in a previous council meeting and I'm just having a blonde moment, or?
No, I
Just
think
refresh my memory?
my answer would be that our staff, Jim and Shelley and maybe others, keep on top of issues and challenges, and they bring stuff to council. So my recollection is that this is the vigilance of our staff around the fiscal health of the city, and we have known for a few months now, maybe half a year, I'm not quite certain, that this need to deal with this work and this issue was before us. But because of elections and so on and timing, it was decided that this presentation would occur in June. So this is not driven by council, but it's much appreciated by council that staff have brought it to us.
So it's just kind of like a general housekeeping, keep you up to date kind of idea.
Keeping on top of things, yes.
Thank you. I think you answered
Is-
everything else I had.
Okay, is that fair enough with the rest of council? I've answered that. Is that the perception of council? Because I'm just giving you my perception. Okay, thank you. Well, I'd like to...
Sorry, may I just...
Yes, Will.
I thought it was interesting that Sue brought up the idea that she sort of, whether or not, she wasn't sure whether or not the 66% support for the pipeline was accurate or not. I just wanted to know, I mean, is there anybody else who kind of maybe feels that way on council, or?
Well, who are you asking the question to? To me?
Let me change
Sort
that.
of general question in terms of-
Well, I'm sure Councillor Kenny can speak for herself, but as I inferred, Councillor Kenny,
Answered the survey.
she also said, which I agree with 100%, that this essentially, the consultation process began, and we're going to continue this process, and more education will go out there. What I inferred was that through further consultation and dialogue, that she would be surprised if that 60-odd% number was sustained. I'm not saying that she doubted the research work being done at all. It's just that there's only 1,000-odd people. I mean, that's great, but there's 12,000 people in this community, and there's more information unfolds.
Okay.
But I didn't.
Maybe if I could change that wording to accurate, inconclusive.
Oh, so you
Yeah,
thought-
like,
oh, so you
not
thought
that it's not
inclusive.
accurate, it's just there's more work that needs to be done.
Okay.
You know,
more work needs to
we
be done.
got people thinking, and we've got part of the population participating, and once they speak to their friends and neighbors and business partners, the community will continue to be more educated, and then that number could change. It could change from what they hear from,
When they get all the facts
When
on
they get
how
all
much
the
it would
facts.
cost
Yeah.
and how much the
so not
water rates are going
inaccurate,
up
just,
and-
it's just,
Okay,
all
sorry,
the-
again, I was
yeah,
just
it's
trying
just
to go
not
off,
all
I was trying to go
there.
off memory here, and
Yeah,
obviously,
yeah.
the article, I mean, I
Yeah.
It's a-
I
it's
have
a
to go to the notes, but again, I
Yeah,
just wanted
yeah.
to clear that up, sort of, in case.
Yeah, it's a
somebody else-
snapshot.
Better tracking down
Alright.
afterwards.
And then ultimately, the ultimate test is, would people support the referendum? Remember,
Yeah.
she said that as well.
Yeah, no,
Exactly.
of course, on a personal level, I think it's
Yeah.
interesting to see whether or not people say they want it, but again, I think you guys will also have to decide whether or not people will actually do want to pay for it, because I may want a Lamborghini, but I'm not going to pay for it, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Uh,
I loved your quote at the last council meeting. I might want a $4 million house, but
Oh, yeah.
I have a $50,000
Revenue.
income, so why would I even hire a architect to
Yeah.
look at building me a $4 million house?
Jill, do you have a question?
Yeah, just for clarification, actually, in the original recommendation, was this issue to be the only strategic priority of 2014, or
The
just one?
overriding.
It's so big.
The word overriding means that it could mean that it's the only one, but it doesn't necessarily say that there might be subservient ones to it. But overriding to me is it's overarching all of the others. They all have to be in the context of this fiscal gap. But Jim wrote it. How did you mean it, Jim? Although council's already determined its will on this.
Through your worship, I was exactly looking for a signal that this was going to be a priority of council in 2014, because that would give me the legitimacy to spend additional staff time on it. I don't have that signal now, and so I won't spend additional time on it until strategic planning. So that's what it was about.
What?
Thank you. Councillor Kenny, did you wish to say somebody? I thought I saw somebody waving a hand over. Okay, maybe I'm just got something going on in my eyes. Okay, thank you then. I'd like to have a motion to adjourn. Councillor McFadden, Councillor Wilbur, meeting's adjourned. Thank you very much, and thank you, the media, being here, and councillors' participation in the discussion. That's good.